In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that even the most advanced species dare not challenge. Never touch human children. The Galactic Council had maintained peace for millennia through careful diplomacy and mutual respect. Trade flourished, knowledge was shared, and conflicts were resolved through negotiation. But some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. Some acts are so fundamentally wrong that they awaken something primal and terrifying in a species known throughout the galaxy for their protective instincts and boundless fury when provoked. The Silithians thought they understood humans. They had studied Earth's history, observed their expansion into the stars, and calculated their military capabilities. What they failed to comprehend was the one force that could unite every human colony, every fleet, every soldier across the galaxy into a single, unstoppable wave of righteous vengeance. They had taken the children. And now, as emergency broadcasts echoed across 1,000 worlds and the very foundations of galactic civilization trembled, one question burned through the cosmos like wildfire. Have they lost all reason? The answer would be written in the stars themselves, in a tale of fury, justice, and the terrible price of underestimating a species that would burn the galaxy itself to protect their young. The morning sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the New Geneva colony as 12-year-old Sarah Chen adjusted her breathing apparatus and stepped outside the habitat dome. The air was thin here, but breathable, and the red-tinged sky held promises of another peaceful day on humanity's newest frontier world. She carried her collection kit, eager to catalog the crystalline formations that grew near the settlement's perimeter. Her younger brother Jake, only 8, bounced beside her with the boundless energy that seemed to defy the planet's lower gravity. "Stay close to the dome's sensor range," their mother, Dr. Elena Chen, called from the research station's entrance. As the colony's chief xenobiologist, she understood the importance of caution, but she also believed in giving children the freedom to explore and learn. "The proximity alarms will sound if you wander too far." Sarah waved acknowledgement, her dark hair catching the alien sunlight as she led Jake toward the crystal fields. The New Geneva colony was small, home to only 300 souls, but it represented something precious to humanity: hope, growth, and the promise of a future among the stars. Children laughed in the distance as they played near the atmospheric processors, their voices carrying across the settlement like music. The Zilithian research vessel, Theoretical Convergence, hung in the planet's upper atmosphere, its sleek organic curves barely visible against the morning sky. To the human colonists below, it was simply another scientific vessel, one of many that had visited their world to study the unique quantum properties of the local crystal formations. The Zilithians had been model galactic citizens for over 2 centuries, known for their advanced theoretical sciences and philosophical approach to exploration. Commander Zek Stull stood on the ship's observation deck, his elongated form casting shadows across the control surfaces. His species evolved on a world of eternal twilight, and their pale, translucent skin seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 6 arms worked simultaneously at different control interfaces, while his large, multifaceted eyes processed information streams that would overwhelm most species. "The quantum resonance readings are beyond our projections," reported Science Coordinator Vale Nim from her position at the sensor array. "The human children appear to have a natural affinity for manipulating the crystal matrix fields. Their neural patterns create harmonics we cannot replicate with our technology." Zexthal's breathing chambers pulsed with what humans might interpret as excitement, though the emotion was far more complex in Zilithian psychology. "The implications for our research are extraordinary. With proper study subjects, we could unlock secrets of quantum consciousness that have eluded us for generations." "Commander," interjected Navigation Officer Kethral, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated concern among his species. "The Galactic Accords specifically prohibit research involving sentient juveniles without explicit consent from both the subjects and their guardians. Human protective instincts regarding their offspring are well documented." Zexthal's attention modules rotated toward his subordinate. The humans will not understand the greater good that could result from temporary research participation. Their emotional responses cloud their judgment. We have an opportunity to advance consciousness studies by centuries. Surely the benefit to all galactic civilization outweighs their primitive territorial instincts. The conversation that followed would later be analyzed by xenopsychologists across known space as a perfect example of how even advanced civilizations could fall prey to the fundamental error of assuming their values were universal. The Zilithians, in their pursuit of knowledge and what they perceived as the greater good, were about to make a decision that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. Sarah and Jake had wandered further from the dome than they realized, drawn by a particularly beautiful cluster of crystals that seemed to sing when the wind moved through them. The formations here were different from those closer to the settlement, larger, more complex, with internal structures that caught and refracted light in mesmerizing patterns.
"Look at this one, Sarah!" Jake exclaimed, reaching toward a crystal that pulsed with soft blue light.
"It's warm." Sarah approached carefully, her scientific training taking precedence over childhood wonder. "Don't touch it directly, Jake. We don't know what kind of energy it might be storing." She pulled out her scanner, a simplified device designed for young researchers, and began taking readings. The data that flowed across her screen was unlike anything she had seen before. The crystal wasn't just storing energy, it was processing it, transforming it in ways that seemed to respond to their presence. When Jake moved closer, the intensity increased. When Sarah stepped back, it dimmed. "It's reacting to us," she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "Jake, I think these crystals are alive, or at least aware somehow." High above them, the theoretical convergence registered the quantum fluctuations caused by the children's interaction with the crystals. The readings were unprecedented, showing neural pattern synchronization between biological consciousness and quantum crystalline matrices. For the Zilithians, it was the discovery of a lifetime. For humanity, it was the beginning of a nightmare. The transport beam engaged without warning, a shimmering column of energy that enveloped both children before they could even cry out. Sarah's scanner clattered to the ground, its screen cracking against the crystal formation as the two young humans were drawn up into the ship above. Dr. Elena Chen was reviewing biological samples in her laboratory when the proximity alarms began screaming across the colony. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the specific warning pattern: perimeter breach, possible abduction. She ran toward the dome's exit, her heart hammering against her ribs as she called her children's names. Other colonists were already mobilizing. Security Chief Marcus Webb, a former Earth Defense Forces officer, was coordinating search teams while trying to establish contact with the Zilithian vessel. Communications Officer Lu Wei was sending priority distress signals across all human channels, her fingers dancing across control interfaces with desperate efficiency.
"The transport signature matches Zilithian technology," reported Science Officer Dr.
James Crawford, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "They took them. Those philosophical bastards actually took our children." Question Maker disputes into the single burning point of focus. Her children were gone, taken by aliens who had been guests in their system, who had been welcomed with open arms and scientific cooperation. The violation was so profound, so fundamentally wrong that her mind struggled to process it. "Get me a direct line to the Galactic Council," she commanded, her voice deadly calm, "and send word to every human colony, every fleet, every diplomatic station in known space. Tell them what has happened here." Chief Webb was already at the weapons locker, his military instincts taking over. "Elena, the colony's defenses can't threaten a ship that size. We need to be smart about this." "Smart?" Elena's composure cracked like ice under pressure. "They stole my children, Marcus. They stole our children. There is no smart response to this. There is only justice." Across the settlement, other parents were gathering their own children close, fear and fury warring in their hearts. The New Geneva colony had been built on principles of peaceful exploration and scientific advancement. None of them were soldiers, but every one of them was human, and humanity had learned long ago that some things were worth fighting for. Regardless of the cost, the theoretical Convergence continued its ascent into higher orbit, its crew completely unprepared for what they had just unleashed. In their sterile research chambers, Sarah and Jake Chen huddled together, frightened but unbroken, unaware that their abduction was about to trigger a response that would echo across the galaxy. In the depths of space, monitoring stations began picking up the first emergency transmissions. On Earth, the Parliamentary Defense Committee was being called into emergency session. In the Outer Rim territories, colonial militias began mobilizing. And in the great trading hubs where humans mingled with dozens of alien species, a word began to spread that made even the most aggressive predator species step carefully away from their human associates. Children. They had taken human children. The Zilithians had made their choice, driven by scientific curiosity and a fundamental misunderstanding of the species they were dealing with. They believed they were conducting research for the greater good of all galactic civilization. What they had actually done was declare war on the most protective, most vengeful, and most terrifyingly persistent species in known space. The consequences would begin within hours and ripple outward for months to come, as humanity prepared to show the galaxy exactly what happened to those who threatened their young. The age of polite diplomatic cooperation was ending, and something far more primal was taking its place. In her laboratory on New Geneva, Dr. Elena Chen began composing a message that would be broadcast to every human settlement in known space. Her hands trembled as she typed, but her voice was steady when she began recording. This is Dr. Elena Chen of New Geneva Colony. 2 hours ago, my children were abducted by Zilithian researchers who had been welcomed as guests in our system. They were 8 and 12 years old. They were collecting crystals for a school science project. They are now prisoners on an alien vessel subject to experimentation without consent, without protection, without hope of rescue unless we act. She paused, staring into the camera that would carry her words across light years of space to reach every human heart. I call upon every human colony, every fleet, every citizen of our scattered species to remember who we are. We are the children of Earth, the inheritors of a world that taught us to protect our own. We are explorers, scientists, diplomats, and traders. But above all, we are parents, siblings, and guardians of the future, and our future has just been stolen. The transmission would reach the nearest human settlements within days, carried by the fastest courier ships the colony could dispatch. But the quantum resonance communication systems would carry the essential message almost instantaneously to the major hub worlds, where it would spread like wildfire through human space. The Zilithians had made their move in the name of science and the greater good. Humanity was about to respond in the name of something far more fundamental, the absolute, unwavering protection of their children. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had become the most successful expanding species in known space, and why even their allies spoke of them with a mixture of admiration and healthy fear. The children of New Geneva had been taken. Now the children of Earth would answer that call, and the response would shake the foundations of galactic civilization itself. Admiral Sarah Morrison received the emergency transmission while reviewing supply reports aboard the UES Indomitable, humanity's newest dreadnought-class vessel. The quantum burst communication from New Geneva came through the military's priority channel, bypassing normal diplomatic protocols entirely. As she listened to Dr. Elena Chen's words, Morrison felt something cold and terrible settle in her chest like a shard of ice. 27 years of military service had prepared her for many things: pirate raids, territorial disputes, even first contact protocols with hostile species. But nothing had prepared her for this moment, when a human mother's voice carried across space to tell her that children had been stolen by beings they had trusted. "Communications, get me Admiral Chen at Jupiter Station," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions, "and patch me through to Colonial Defense Command on Mars." FullPriorityEncryption.com. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, but Morrison could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their hands lingered near weapon systems even though they were currently in peaceful space near the Centauri trading stations. Word was already spreading through the ship's corridors, carried by the kind of instantaneous communication network that existed among tight-knit military units. Within minutes, the holographic forms of Admiral David Chen and Colonial Defense Director Amanda Torres materialized on the bridge. Both wore expressions of barely contained fury that Morrison recognized in her own mirror. "Sarah, please tell me this is some kind of mistake," Admiral Chen said, though his tone suggested he already knew it wasn't. "Please tell me that Zilithian researchers didn't actually abduct human children from a peaceful colony." Morrison activated the playback of Dr. Elena Chen's transmission. The three highest-ranking military officers in human space watched in silence as a desperate mother called for justice for her stolen children. When it ended, the silence stretched for long moments. "Those philosophical bastards have just made the biggest mistake in galactic history," Director Torres said finally, her voice deadly quiet. "How long since the abduction?" 6 hours, Morrison replied, checking her chronometer. "The theoretical convergence is still in the Kepler 4-2 system, but they're maintaining high orbit. The colonists have no way to reach them." "Then we reach them," Admiral Chen said with finality. "Sarah the Indomitable is our closest heavy unit." "How fast can you get to New Geneva?" Morrison was already calculating jump coordinates and fuel consumption. 48 hours if we push the drives to emergency limits. But David, we need to be smart about this. One ship against a Zilithian research vessel isn't the issue. It's what comes after. If we force a military confrontation over this, it could destabilize the entire galactic balance. "The galactic balance?" Torres leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "Sarah, they stole children, human children, 8 and 12 years old. There is no balance that matters more than getting them back and making sure this never happens again." The conversation that followed would later be studied in military academies across human space as a perfect example of how moral clarity could cut through political complexity. Within an hour, the highest levels of human government had been briefed. Within 2 hours, emergency sessions were being called in the Colonial Assembly, the Earth Parliament, and every major human settlement government. But the military was already moving. Captain Elena Vasquez received her orders while her heavy cruiser Retribution was docked at the Vega Station shipyards. The message was brief, encrypted at the highest levels, and contained coordinates for an immediate departure. As she read the operational briefing, her normally steady hands began to shake. "All department heads to the bridge immediately," she announced over the ship's communication system, "and get me the fastest courier ship in the dock. I need to send word ahead to our destination." The Retribution was one of 12 Aegis-class heavy cruisers that form the backbone of humanity's deep space defense fleet. Each was capable of engaging multiple enemy vessels simultaneously while protecting civilian populations. Captain Vasquez had commanded her ship for 8 years, through pirate suppression campaigns and territorial disputes, but she had never felt the kind of cold fury that was building in her chest now. Her senior officers assembled within minutes, their faces showing confusion that quickly turned to understanding as Vasquez briefed them on the situation at New Geneva. "Orders are simple," she concluded. "We proceed to Kepler 442 at maximum speed and coordinate with Admiral Morrison's task force. Primary objective is the safe recovery of the abducted children. Secondary objective is ensuring the Zilithians understand the consequences of their actions." Commander John Harrison, her executive officer, raised a concern that was echoing through military channels across human space. "Captain, this could be seen as an act of war against a species we've had peaceful relations with for over 2 centuries. Vasquez looked around the room at officers she had served with for years, men and women who understood duty, sacrifice, and the protection of innocence. "John, there are some things that transcend political considerations. Children have been stolen from their parents. If that's not worth the risk of war, then what the hell are we out here protecting?" The sentiment was being echoed across human space as word of the abduction spread through civilian and military channels alike. On Mars, emergency session debates raged through the night as Colonial Assembly members struggled to balance outrage with political reality. On Earth, the Parliamentary Defense Committee was drafting resolutions that would fundamentally change humanity's relationship with the Galactic Council. But nowhere was the response more immediate and visceral than in the Outer Rim colonies, where human settlements lived on the edge of known space and had learned to depend on each other for survival. Captain Maria Santos had been hauling mining equipment between the Tau Ceti system and the frontier worlds when the priority transmission reached her freight convoy. The Star Wanderer wasn't a warship, she was an old reliable cargo hauler that had been Santos's home for 15 years. But like many civilian captains operating in the frontier regions, Santos maintained relationships with colonial militias and kept her ship equipped for more than just commerce. "How many ships do we have in the convoy, Rico?" she asked her first officer, Rico Delgado, who had been with her since she first bought the Star Wanderer. 18 cargo haulers, 6 escort fighters, and 2 patrol boats, Rico replied, understanding immediately where her thoughts were heading. "Most of the captains have families back on the colony worlds. They're not going to like hearing about this." Santos activated the convoy's emergency communication channel, addressing all 26 ships simultaneously. "This is Captain Santos with a priority briefing. 2 hours ago, Zilithian researchers abducted 2 human children from New Geneva colony. The kids were 8 and 12 years old, taken while they were playing near their settlement." The communication channel erupted with angry voices as 18 different captains tried to respond simultaneously. Santos let the fury wash over the speakers for a moment before calling for order. "I know what you're thinking, because I'm thinking the same thing," she continued. "We're not warships, and we're not soldiers, but we're human beings, and human children have been stolen by aliens who were supposed to be our friends. I'm altering course for Kepler 442. Anyone who wants to join me is welcome. Anyone who doesn't is free to continue to their original destinations." Not a single ship broke off from the convoy. The response was being repeated across human space as word spread. Civilian captains altered their routes to converge on the New Geneva system. Colonial militias began mobilizing their small defense fleets. Mining consortiums placed their security forces on alert, and in the great trading hubs where humans did business with dozens of alien species, human merchants began quietly withdrawing from joint ventures and calling in debts. The economic implications would become clear within days, but the immediate message was unmistakable. Humanity was preparing for something that hadn't been seen since their first expansion into space. Dr. Elena Chen stood in the New Geneva colony's communications center watching data streams flow in from across human space. Ships were moving, militias were mobilizing, and governments were taking emergency actions. Her call for justice was being answered on a scale that amazed and terrified her. "Elena!" Chief Webb approached her carefully, understanding the dangerous emotional state she was operating in. "We're getting reports that the Indomitable and at least 6 other major vessels are en route. Admiral Morrison expects to arrive within 40 hours. Elena nodded, her eyes never leaving the displays that showed her children's location aboard the Zilithian ship in high orbit. "What about diplomatic channels? Has anyone tried to negotiate their release?"
"The Galactic Council is attempting to mediate," Webb replied carefully.
"But the Zilithians are claiming this is a legitimate research endeavor under the scientific advancement protocols. They're saying the children volunteered to participate." The lie was so audacious, so fundamentally insulting to basic intelligence, that Elena felt something snap inside her chest. Sarah and Jake were children, 8 and 12 years old. The idea that they could legally consent to alien experimentation was beyond absurd. It was deliberately provocative. "Marcus," she said quietly, "patch me through to Admiral Morrison's fleet. I want to speak directly to every human captain heading to our system." Webb hesitated. "Elena, you're not military command. Protocol would be... Protocol..." Elena interrupted, turning to face him with eyes that burned like stars. "Stopped mattering the moment aliens stole my children. Put me through to the fleet." The transmission that followed would become one of the most famous communications in human history. Dr. Elena Chen, a scientist and mother whose world had been shattered by an unthinkable act, spoke directly to the military forces converging on her system. This is Dr. Elena Chen speaking from New Geneva Colony, where my children, Sarah and Jake, were abducted 6 hours ago by Zilithian researchers. I want to thank every captain, every crew member, every human being who is risking their lives to help us recover our children. She paused, staring directly into the camera that would carry her image to bridge screens across a growing fleet. But I also want you to understand something. This isn't just about my children anymore. The Zilithians have claimed that Sarah and Jake volunteered for experimentation. They are 8 and 12 years old. Children cannot consent to alien medical procedures. David prizes. The very suggestion is an insult to every parent in human space. Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued, channeling the fury of millions of human parents across the galaxy. What has happened here is a fundamental violation of everything we stand for as a species. We explore the galaxy in peace, we trade with alien civilizations in good faith, we contribute to galactic knowledge and prosperity, but we will not tolerate threats to our children. We will not accept that superior technology gives anyone the right to treat our young as experimental subjects. The transmission reached every human vessel heading toward New Geneva, but it also propagated through the civilian communication networks to every human settlement in known space. On worlds where humans lived alongside alien species, the message was heard by non-human populations who suddenly found themselves looking at their human neighbors with new understanding. Humanity wasn't just angry. Humanity was unified in a way that hadn't been seen since their homeworld was threatened centuries ago. Captain Torres of the merchant vessel Bright Future was trading at Kepler Station when Elena Chen's message reached the commercial networks. The station served as a hub for dozens of species, a cosmopolitan center of galactic commerce where humans, Zilithians, Koraths, and others conducted business in peaceful cooperation. But as Elena's words echoed through the station's public areas, Torres watched the careful social dynamics that governed interspecies interaction begin to shift. Human traders who had been negotiating deals with Zilithian counterparts quietly excused themselves from meetings. Human customers left Zilithian-operated businesses. And in the station's central plaza, humans began gathering in groups that other species gave wide berths. Captain. Her communications officer called from the ship's bridge, "We're getting priority messages from human vessels throughout the sector. They're organizing some kind of economic response. Trade boycotts, contract cancellations, withdrawal from joint ventures. Humanity was about to demonstrate that their integration into galactic commerce came with strings attached, strings that could strangle alien economies if pulled in coordination." "Open a channel to all human ships in this system," Torres ordered, "and get me Captain Morrison of the Solar Wind. I believe he's coordinating the merchant response." What followed was a conversation that would reshape galactic economics. Human merchants weren't just angry about the abduction of children. They were systematically organizing to use their economic leverage as a weapon. Within hours, Zilithian trade agreements worth billions of credits were being canceled. Joint research projects were suspended. And on trading stations across the galaxy, signs began appearing in human-operated businesses. "Zilithians not welcome until our children are returned." The Zilithian economy depended heavily on human partnership in dozens of industries. Their theoretical research required human intuitive problem-solving capabilities. Their exploration fleets relied on human navigational expertise, and their colonies needed human agricultural technology to maintain food security. Within 12 hours of the abduction, the Zilithian government was facing an economic crisis that threatened to collapse their interstellar infrastructure. But humanity was just getting started. The theoretical convergence maintained its high orbit around Kepler. 442b, its crew increasingly aware that their scientific triumph was rapidly becoming a political and economic disaster. Commander Zex Thule reviewed reports flowing in from Zilithian space with growing alarm. Trade routes were being severed, research partnerships canceled, and economic agreements dissolved with surgical precision. Commander, Science Coordinator Vale Nim reported from the research chambers the human juveniles continue to demonstrate remarkable quantum resonance capabilities. The data we're collecting could advance consciousness studies by centuries. Zexthul's attention modules focused on his subordinate with something approaching desperation. The value of our research may be irrelevant if the entire structure of galactic civilization collapses around us. The humans are responding with coordinated economic warfare on a scale I did not anticipate. Perhaps, suggested Navigation Officer Kethral carefully, we should consider returning the subjects to their colony. The research data we have already collected is substantial. The conversation was interrupted by proximity alarms as the first human military vessels began emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. The Indomitable appeared first, its massive form bristling with weapon systems that could reduce the Zalithian research vessel to component atoms within minutes. But Admiral Morrison wasn't interested in destruction, not yet. She wanted something far more important than revenge. She wanted the children back safely. Everything else could be discussed afterward. The second phase of humanity's response was about to begin, and the galaxy was watching with a mixture of fascination and terror as the most protective species in known space prepared to demonstrate exactly what happened to those who threatened their young. Admiral Sarah Morrison stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, as her tactical display showed the theoretical convergence maintaining position in high orbit above New Geneva. The Zalithian research vessel was elegant in the way that species favored organic curves and bio-integrated technology that seemed to grow rather than be constructed. Under different circumstances, Morrison might have admired the alien ship's aesthetic beauty. Today, it looked like a prison holding human children. Admiral, Communications Officer Lieutenant Parker reported, "We're receiving a transmission from the Zalithian vessel. They're requesting negotiations under Galactic Council mediation protocols." Morrison felt a cold smile touch her lips. "Tell them we're happy to negotiate, right after they return the children they abducted to their parents. Until then, we have nothing to discuss." The human fleet continued to grow as more ships emerged from hyperspace. Captain Vasquez's Retribution took position on the Zalithian vessel's port flank, while a squadron of colonial militia fighters spread out to cover all escape vectors. The merchant convoy led by Captain Santos had arrived 2 hours earlier, their cargo ships taking positions that looked peaceful but effectively created a blockade of the system's hyperspace jump points. "Status report, Commander Harrison," Morrison requested from her executive officer. 17 military vessels now on station, including 5 heavy cruisers and the battle cruiser Defiant from the Wolf system. Another 23 civilian ships providing support and transportation capacity. Total human presence in system now exceeds 40 vessels, Harrison reported with satisfaction. The Zalithians are completely surrounded. Morrison nodded approvingly. The response had been faster and more comprehensive than even she had hoped. Humanity had mobilized with the kind of coordinated efficiency that usually required months of planning and preparation. But when children were threatened, apparently, humans could move mountains. "Any word from the Galactic Council?" she asked. "Ambassador Chen is en route from the diplomatic station at Proxima, but she won't arrive for another 18 hours. Council representatives are demanding we withdraw our forces and submit to arbitration," Harrison replied. Morrison's expression hardened. "The Council can demand whatever they want. We're not moving until those children are safely returned to their parents." Aboard the theoretical convergence, Commander Zexthul was discovering that the situation had evolved far beyond his ability to control. The quantum resonance chambers where Sarah and Jake Chen were being held had become the center of a galactic crisis that threatened to reshape interstellar politics. "Commander," reported Science Coordinator Vale Nim, "the human military vessels are maintaining weapons lock on our position. Their targeting systems are more advanced than our defensive capabilities can handle." Zexthul's breathing chambers contracted with stress. "What is the status of our research subjects?" "The human juveniles remain in containment, but their quantum interaction with our equipment has increased significantly. I believe their emotional distress is amplifying their natural abilities," Vale Nim replied. The data we're collecting is unprecedented, but the subjects are showing signs of psychological trauma. Sarah and Jake Chen were 8 and 12 years old, stolen from their parents, imprisoned on an alien ship, and subjected to experiments they couldn't understand. Their terror was feeding back through the quantum crystalline matrix in ways that made the research data more valuable while simultaneously torturing the children who generated it. Perhaps, Navigation Officer Kethrau suggested carefully, we should consider the long-term diplomatic implications of our current position. The human response has been far more coordinated and aggressive than our psychological profiles predicted. Zexthel's attention modules rotated toward displays showing the human fleet positions. They are reacting emotionally rather than logically. Surely they will see reason when presented with the potential benefits of our research. It was a fundamental failure of understanding that characterized many first contacts between humans and highly logical species. The Zilithians assumed that rational argument could overcome emotional response, not realizing that the protection of children was so deeply embedded in human psychology that it transcended rational thought entirely. Elena Chen stood in the New Geneva Colony's communication center watching feeds from the human ships surrounding the vessel that held her children. The sight of the growing fleet should have been reassuring, but she couldn't shake the image of Sarah and Jake alone and frightened aboard an alien ship. Dr. Chen, Chief Webb, approached with a data pad. We're getting reports from monitoring stations throughout the system. The quantum resonance readings from the Zilithian ship have increased dramatically since our fleet arrived. The alien vessel is generating energy signatures we've never seen before. Elena studied the readings with growing alarm. As a xenobiologist, she understood enough about quantum mechanics to recognize when natural phenomena were being artificially amplified. Marcus, I think they're using my children's fear to enhance their experiments. Their emotional distress is feeding back through whatever quantum systems they're studying. The realization hit Webb like a physical blow. You mean they're torturing the kids to generate better research data? Elena's expression became deadly calm. Get me Admiral Morrison, now. The conversation that followed would become a turning point in human-alien relations. When Dr. Shellcrews invented a decline of summary, Elena Chen explained her analysis to Admiral Morrison. The military officer's response was immediate and unequivocal. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, she broadcast to the human fleet. We have reason to believe the Zilithians are actively using the children's psychological distress to enhance their experimental results. The abduction has escalated to torture of human juveniles for scientific purposes. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before every human captain in the fleet began requesting permission to open fire. Morrison understood the fury of her subordinates because she felt it herself. But she also understood that destroying the Zilithian ship would kill the children they were trying to rescue. The situation required a more subtle approach, theoretical convergence. This is Admiral Morrison of the United Earth ship Indomitable. You have 30 minutes to transfer the human children to our custody or we will board your vessel and take them by force. This is your only warning. The response came within minutes, transmitted on diplomatic frequencies that indicated the Zilithians finally understood the gravity of their situation. Admiral Morrison, this is Commander Zex Fool. The human juveniles are participants in legitimate scientific research approved by Galactic Council protocols. We cannot simply terminate ongoing experiments without compromising centuries of potential advancement in consciousness studies. Commander Zexthal, you have 29 minutes to return those children to their parents. Your scientific research ended the moment you decided to conduct it without consent on human juveniles. Your centuries of advancement mean nothing compared to the safety of 2 frightened children who want to go home. The broadcast was heard not only by the Zilithian ship, but by monitoring stations throughout the sector. Within hours, Morrison's words would be transmitted across the galaxy, carried by the same quantum communication networks that were spreading news of humanity's unified response to the crisis. On the trading station at Wolf Wade 35-9, Zilithian merchants found themselves facing empty negotiation rooms as human partners canceled meetings and terminated contracts. On the research station at Kepler 186, joint human-Zalithian projects worth decades of work were being suspended indefinitely. And on New Pacifica, where humans and Zalithians had built one of the galaxy's most successful joint colonies, families were packing their belongings and requesting transport to human-only settlements. The economic pressure was becoming politically unsustainable for the Zalithian government. Emergency sessions of their ruling council were debating responses to a crisis that was spiraling beyond their control. But the philosophical approach to problem-solving that had made them successful as researchers was proving inadequate for dealing with human protective instincts. Counselor Prime Vetholan addressed the emergency session from the capital world of Zalithia Prime, his elongated form casting shadows across the assembly chamber as he spoke to representatives from across Zalithian space. The human response has exceeded all reasonable projections, he stated, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of confusion. Their economic warfare is threatening critical infrastructure across 14 systems. Their military deployment suggests preparation for large-scale conflict, all this for 2 juvenile research subjects. The statement revealed the fundamental gap in understanding that had created the crisis. To the Zalithians, Sarah and Jake Chen were research subjects whose value was measured in scientific advancement. To humanity, they were children whose safety was more important than galactic peace itself.
Counselor Prime, interjected Research Administrator Next Call, the data being generated by the quantum consciousness experiments is beyond calculation in value.
The human juveniles are demonstrating abilities that could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. Surely the temporary distress of 2 individuals is acceptable when weighed against the benefits to all galactic civilization. The logic was impeccable by Zalithian standards. The greater good outweighed individual concerns, especially when those individuals were from what they considered a less advanced species. But logic, as they were about to discover, had little relevance when dealing with human protective instincts. Counselor Yel Thora, one of the few Zalithians who had extensive experience with human psychology, raised an objection that would prove prophetic. Counselor Prime, I believe we are fundamentally misunderstanding the human response. Their protective behaviors regarding juveniles are not rational calculations of benefit versus cost. They are hardwired survival mechanisms that override logical decision-making. We are not dealing with a political disagreement that can be negotiated. We are confronting instinctual behaviors that will continue regardless of consequences. The debate that followed would later be studied as an example of how advanced civilizations could completely misunderstand the species they interacted with. The Zalithians continued to believe they could negotiate a rational solution to a crisis they had created by violating the most fundamental taboo in human psychology. Meanwhile, Admiral Morrison's deadline was approaching. Aboard the Indomitable, Morrison reviewed tactical plans with her senior officers while monitoring communications from the Zalithian vessel. The alien ship had made no move to comply with her ultimatum, and time was running out. "Admiral," reported her tactical officer, "we have full sensor scans of the Zalithian ship's layout. The research chambers where the children are being held are located in the vessel's central core, surrounded by quantum processing equipment that could be dangerous if damaged." Morrison studied the tactical displays, understanding the complexity of what she was being asked to do. A boarding action against a vessel filled with unknown alien technology, with the lives of 2 children hanging in the balance. One mistake could kill everyone aboard both ships. "What about their defensive systems?" she asked. "Minimal," replied her security chief, Commander Rodriguez. "Their ship is designed for research, not combat, but the quantum experiments they're conducting could create unpredictable energy discharges if disrupted. We'd be going in blind regarding the safety of the boarding parties." Morrison made a decision that would define her career and possibly humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. "Prep the boarding shuttles. Full marine complement, but I want specialists in alien technology and quantum physics. We're going to get those children back." The preparations began immediately, but they were interrupted by an incoming transmission from the theoretical convergence. "Admiral Morrison, this is Commander Zexthal. We propose a compromise solution." Allow our research to continue for an additional 72 hours, and we will share all collected data with human scientists. The advancement in consciousness studies will benefit both our species. Morrison's response was delivered in a voice cold enough to freeze hydrogen. Commander, you have 15 minutes left. Return the children now, or we're coming to get them. The transmission that followed would become one of the most infamous communications in galactic history, as Commander Zex Thal revealed the depths of his species' misunderstanding of human nature. Admiral Morrison, you must understand that the temporary distress of 2 juveniles is insignificant compared to the potential benefits for all sentient life. The quantum consciousness research we are conducting could unlock secrets that have puzzled the galaxy for millennia. Surely reasonable beings can see that the greater good must take precedence over individual concerns. The silence that followed stretched for long seconds before Morrison's reply echoed across the communication channels. Commander Zex Thal, you just revealed everything we need to know about your species and your so-called research. You kidnap children, you're torturing them for scientific data, and you think it's justified because you might learn something useful. You have 10 minutes to return Sarah and Jake Chen to their parents. After that, we stop asking nicely. The countdown began. Broadcast to every human ship in the fleet and relayed to monitoring stations throughout the sector. Across human space, millions of people watched chronometers tick down toward a moment that would define their species' place in the galaxy. On New Geneva, Dr. Elena Chen stood with the other colonists in the settlement's central plaza, their faces turned upward toward the sky where lights moved in complex patterns as ships maneuvered for position. Parents held their children close while watching displays that showed the standoff in orbit above their world. 5 minutes remaining, announced Chief Webb over the colony's communication system. All ships report ready for boarding action. Elena felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she imagined Sarah and Jake alone and frightened aboard the alien ship. Her children had been stolen, terrorized, and used as experimental subjects by beings they had welcomed as guests in their system. The violation was so complete, so fundamentally wrong, that she could barely process the emotions coursing through her. 2 minutes remaining. The human fleet moved into final position, boarding shuttles launching from multiple ships while the heavier vessels maintained targeting locks on the Zilithian research vessel. The coordination was flawless, the result of training and preparation, but also something deeper, the unified response of a species whose children had been threatened. 1 minute remaining. As he watched the human boarding shuttles approach his ship, he finally began to understand the magnitude of his error. The humans weren't going to negotiate. They weren't going to accept rational arguments about the greater good. They were going to take their children back by force regardless of the cost in lives or diplomatic relationships. All sections, prepare to receive human boarding parties, he announced to his crew. Do not resist. Transfer custody of the research subjects immediately upon demand. The boarding action that followed would be studied in military academies for generations as an example of precision, coordination, and restraint under extreme pressure. Human Marines breached the Zilithian ship at multiple points simultaneously, while technical specialists located and secured the research chambers where the children were being held. The rescue took less than 20 minutes from start to finish, but those 20 minutes changed the galaxy forever. When Sarah and Jake Chen were finally reunited with their parents on the surface of New Geneva, the image was broadcast to every human settlement in known space. 2 children running across a landing pad into their mother's arms became a symbol of something fundamental about human nature, the absolute, unwavering protection of their young. The crisis was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Humanity had demonstrated that their integration into galactic civilization came with conditions that non-negotiable. They would trade, explore, and cooperate with alien species, but they would never again tolerate threats to their children. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you tested the patience of the most protective species in known space. The medical bay aboard the Indomitable had been hastily converted into a family reunion area as Dr. Elena Chen held her children for the first time in 36 hours. Sarah and Jake clung to their mother with the desperate intensity of children who had faced something they couldn't understand. their small forms trembling against her as if they feared being taken again. "Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "They kept asking us questions and making us touch things that hurt. When we cried, the machines got brighter and made more noise." Elena felt something break inside her chest as she realized the full scope of what her children had endured. The Zilithians hadn't just abducted them. They had discovered that emotional distress amplified the quantum effects they were studying and had deliberately maintained conditions designed to keep the children frightened and confused. Admiral Morrison stood nearby, her expression carefully neutral as she listened to the young girl's account. 27 years of military service had exposed her to many horrors, but the clinical cruelty of using children's fear as a research tool violated something fundamental in her understanding of civilized behavior. "Sarah," she said gently, kneeling down to the girl's eye level, "you and Jake are safe now. But I need you to help us understand what happened so we can make sure it never happens to other children. Can you tell me about the machines they made you touch?" Sarah looked to her mother for reassurance before speaking. "They were crystals, but they were warm and they hummed when we got close. The aliens kept making us put our hands on them even when we said it hurt. And when Jake started crying, they seemed happy because the crystals got brighter." Admiral Morrison felt her carefully maintained composure slip as she absorbed the implications of the child's words. The Zilithians had been deliberately inducing emotional trauma in human children to enhance their experimental results. It was a level of callous cruelty that challenged everything she thought she knew about the supposedly philosophical alien species. "Admiral," Dr. Marcus Webb approached with a datapad, his expression grim. "We've completed our analysis of the quantum resonance patterns recorded during the children's captivity. The readings confirm that the Zilithians were using the children's psychological distress to amplify quantum consciousness effects by several orders of magnitude." Morrison reviewed the technical data, understanding enough to realize that the aliens had discovered something valuable through their torture of human children. The knowledge that their suffering had generated scientifically significant results made the crime infinitely worse in her mind. "What's the status of the Zilithian vessel?" she asked. "Still in orbit, but they've requested permission to leave the system." "They're claiming that their research is complete and they have no further need for human subjects," Webb reported. Morrison's expression hardened to something that would have frightened experienced Marines. "They're not leaving. Not until we've had a very thorough discussion about research ethics and the consequences of their actions." The response was spreading throughout human space as word of the children's rescue propagated through communication networks. But rather than satisfaction at the successful recovery, the revelation of what Sarah and Jake had endured was generating a wave of fury that dwarfed the initial outrage over their abduction. On Earth, emergency sessions of Parliament had evolved into something approaching a war council, as representatives debated humanity's response to what was increasingly being characterized as an act of war against human civilians. The careful diplomatic language that usually governed interstellar relations had been replaced by blunt demands for justice and retribution. Parliamentary Defense Minister Amanda Rodriguez addressed the emergency session with barely contained rage. "Fellow representatives, we are not dealing with a diplomatic misunderstanding or a cultural miscommunication. The Zilithians deliberately abducted human children from a peaceful colony, transported them against their will to an alien vessel, and conducted experiments designed to cause psychological trauma while collecting scientific data from their suffering." The chamber erupted in angry voices as representatives from every human world demanded action. The measured tones of political discourse had given way to something more primal, the collective voice of a species whose young had been threatened. "The question before us," Minister Rodriguez continued, "is not whether the Zilithians committed an unforgivable crime against humanity. The question is how we respond to that crime in a way that ensures it never happens again." The debate that followed would reshape human foreign policy for generations to come. Traditional diplomatic approaches seemed inadequate when faced with such a fundamental violation of human values. Military action risked escalating the situation into a galactic war, but doing nothing would signal to every alien species that human children could be victimized without consequence. Representative James Chen from the Mars colonies articulated what many were thinking. Minister Rodriguez, the Zilithians have demonstrated that they view our children as expendable research materials. They kidnap them, terrorize them, and use their suffering to advance their scientific objectives. How do we negotiate with beings who consider torture of human juveniles an acceptable research methodology? The question struck at the heart of humanity's dilemma. How do you maintain peaceful relations with a species that has revealed itself to be fundamentally alien in its moral framework? How do you trust beings who think the greater good justifies any individual suffering? On Proxima Station, Ambassador Lisa Chen was receiving reports from human diplomatic outposts throughout the galaxy that painted a disturbing picture of alien reactions to the crisis. Many species were expressing confusion about humanity's extreme response to what they viewed as a minor research incident. Others were quietly reassessing their own relationships with human populations in their territories. Ambassador, her aide Marcus Torres, reported, "We're getting communications from human communities on mixed-species worlds. Many are requesting emergency evacuation assistance. They're afraid that other alien governments might decide that human civilians are acceptable research subjects." Ambassador Chen felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as she realized that the Zilithian incident had shattered something fundamental about human trust in galactic civilization. For over 2 centuries, humans had integrated themselves into alien societies based on the assumption that certain basic moral principles were universal. The discovery that they were wrong was creating a crisis of confidence that threatened to unravel decades of carefully built relationships. Marcus, draft a priority message to all human diplomatic missions. I want a complete assessment of human civilian security in every mixed-species territory within 72 hours, and get me a direct line to the Galactic Council. It's time for some very blunt conversations about research ethics and species protection protocols. The diplomatic crisis was expanding beyond the immediate incident as humans throughout the galaxy began questioning whether their integration into alien societies had made them vulnerable to exploitation. The Zilithian research program had revealed a blind spot in galactic civilization's moral framework that humans were not willing to tolerate. Commander Zek's Tool stood in the Theoretical Convergence's research chambers, reviewing the unprecedented data his team had collected during their 36 hours of human subject research. The quantum consciousness readings were beyond anything in Zilithian scientific literature, representing advances in consciousness studies that could reshape their understanding of sentient awareness itself. Science Coordinator Vale Nim, he called to his subordinate. Compile all research data for immediate transmission to the Zilithian Science Directorate. Ensure that our findings are preserved regardless of what happens to our vessel. Vale Nim's breathing chambers pulsed with what might have been anxiety in a human but represented complex philosophical contemplation in Zilithian psychology. Commander, the human response to our research has exceeded all projections. Their economic warfare has already caused significant damage to our infrastructure, and their military deployment suggests they are prepared for extended conflict. Zek Stull reviewed displays showing the human fleet maintaining positions around his ship. 17 military vessels and dozens of civilian craft had created an inescapable containment field around the theoretical convergence. But more disturbing were the reports flowing in from Zilithian space indicating that the human response was expanding far beyond military action. Commander, Navigation Officer Keth Rawl reported, "We're receiving communications from the home fleet. Human economic pressure has forced the suspension of critical supply routes to 14 colonies. The Science Directorate is requesting immediate termination of our research and withdrawal from human space." The request revealed how completely the Zilithians had misjudged the human response. They had expected diplomatic protests, perhaps some trade restrictions, but not the coordinated economic warfare that was threatening to collapse their interstellar infrastructure. The humans had demonstrated that their integration into galactic commerce came with strings that could strangle alien economies when pulled in unison. Perhaps, Keth Rawl continued carefully, we should consider that our research methodology may have violated fundamental human behavioral parameters that we failed to account for in our psychological profiles. It was the closest a Zalithan could come to admitting moral error without abandoning their species' philosophical framework entirely. They were beginning to understand that humanity operated according to principles that transcended rational cost-benefit analysis, particularly when their children were threatened. Admiral Morrison received the priority transmission from Earth while reviewing tactical assessments of the Zalithian vessel. The message was brief, encrypted at the highest levels, and contained authorization codes that made her blood run cold. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "priority Alpha transmission from Colonial Defense Command. Admiral Chen is requesting immediate secure conference." Morrison activated the quantum encryption protocols that would ensure their conversation remained private even from the most advanced alien surveillance systems. Admiral David Chen's holographic form materialized on her bridge, his expression carrying the weight of decisions that would reshape humanity's place in the galaxy. "Sarah, I need you to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with," Chen began without preamble. "The analysis of the children's experiences has revealed that the Zalithians weren't just conducting unauthorized research. They were deliberately torturing human juveniles to enhance their experimental results. The quantum resonance patterns show that they discovered the children's psychological distress amplified the effects they were studying." Morrison felt something cold settle in her stomach as the implications became clear. "David, are you telling me that an advanced alien civilization has developed a research methodology based on torturing human children?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Chen replied grimly, "and the broader implications are even worse. Sarah, this wasn't an isolated incident by rogue researchers. The Zalithian Science Directorate has been aware of human quantum consciousness properties for years. We're looking at the possibility of a systematic program to exploit human civilians for research purposes." The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow. Humanity had spent over 2 centuries integrating themselves into galactic civilization based on the assumption that advanced species shared certain basic moral principles. The discovery that they had been fundamentally wrong about alien nature challenged everything humans thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. "What are my orders, Admiral?" Morrison asked. Though she suspected she already knew the answer, Chen's expression hardened to something that would have been recognized by every human military officer who had ever faced an existential threat to their species. "Sarah, you are hereby authorized to take whatever actions are necessary to ensure that what happened to those children never happens again. The safety of human civilians throughout the galaxy now depends on making it clear that we will not tolerate threats to our young, regardless of the diplomatic consequences." Morrison understood immediately. She was being given broad authority to respond to the Zalithian incident in whatever way she deemed appropriate, up to and including actions that might trigger a galactic war. The decision represented a fundamental shift in human foreign policy, from integration and cooperation to protection and deterrence. "Admiral," she replied, "I understand my orders. The theoretical convergence will not be leaving this system until we've had a very thorough discussion about research ethics and species protection." The conversation that followed would later be classified at levels requiring special authorization to access, but its general outline became clear through subsequent actions. Humanity was preparing to demonstrate that their expansion into space had created not just colonies and trade networks, but a distributed defensive capability that could respond to threats against human civilians anywhere in the galaxy. Dr. Elena Chen sat with her children in the medical bay, watching as specialists conducted gentle examinations to ensure no lasting physical damage from their captivity. But the psychological trauma was clearly visible in the way Sarah and Jake startled at unexpected sounds and refused to be separated from their mother. "Dr. Chen," Admiral Morrison approached carefully, understanding the delicate emotional state the family was operating in. "I need to ask the children some more questions about their experiences. The information is critical for preventing similar incidents in the future." Elena nodded, recognizing the necessity even as she hated subjecting her children to more questioning. "Sarah, Jake, Admiral Morrison needs to understand what happened to you so she can protect other children. Can you help her?" Sarah looked up at the imposing military officer with eyes that seemed far too old for her 12-year-old face. "Admiral, they kept saying we were helping them learn important things. They said our fear made their machines work better. When we asked to go home, they said we couldn't understand how important the research was." Morrison felt her carefully maintained professional composure slip as she absorbed the child's words. The Zilithians hadn't just kidnapped them. They had psychologically manipulated them into believing their suffering was justified by scientific necessity. It was a level of sophisticated cruelty that challenged her understanding of sentient morality. "Sarah," she said gently, "did they ever explain why they chose human children instead of adults from their own species?" "They said human children had special abilities that adults couldn't use anymore, and they said we couldn't really understand what was happening, so it didn't matter if we were scared." The casual dismissal of human consciousness as irrelevant to their suffering revealed the depths of Zilithian arrogance and misunderstanding. They had treated human children as experimental animals whose emotional states were tools to be manipulated rather than experiences to be respected. Morrison made a decision that would define the rest of her career and possibly humanity's future in the galaxy. The Zilithians had revealed themselves to be fundamentally incompatible with human values, and the only appropriate response was to ensure they never had the opportunity to harm human civilians again. The final phase of humanity's response was about to begin, and the galaxy would learn exactly what happened when you made the mistake of treating human children as expendable research materials. The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime had witnessed many crises over the millennia, but nothing quite like the emergency session convened to address what was rapidly becoming known as the Human Zilithian Incident. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the vast amphitheater that served as the heart of galactic diplomacy, their various forms creating a tapestry of evolutionary diversity that normally symbolized the unity of interstellar civilization. Today, that unity was fracturing along lines no one had anticipated. Council moderator Vel Karath of the ancient Ashanti Collective called the session to order with ceremonial precision, but the tension in the chamber was palpable. The Zilithians had requested emergency mediation, claiming that human economic warfare was threatening to destabilize entire sectors of galactic commerce. Humanity had countered with demands for justice that went far beyond traditional diplomatic remedies. "Honored representatives," Vel Karath intoned in the harmonic frequencies that served as the Council's official language, "we gather to address allegations of unauthorized research conducted by Zilithian scientists on human juveniles and the subsequent response by human military and civilian authorities." Ambassador Lisa Chen rose from the human delegation's position, her movement causing subtle shifts throughout the chamber as representatives assessed the implications of her presence. The humans had never sent their most senior diplomatic official to a council session before, and her attendance signaled that humanity was treating this incident as a fundamental challenge to their continued participation in galactic civilization. "Council Moderator," Ambassador Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "I must correct a mischaracterization in your opening statement. This was not unauthorized research conducted by Zilithian scientists. This was the kidnapping, imprisonment, and torture of human children by representatives of a supposedly civilized species." The blunt language created an immediate reaction throughout the chamber. Most galactic diplomacy was conducted through layers of euphemism and indirect reference that allowed different species to maintain face while negotiating compromises.
Ambassador Chen's direct accusation violated centuries of established protocol.
Zilithian Counselor Prime Vaithawan responded with the measured tones his species had perfected over millennia of philosophical discourse. "Ambassador Chen, your characterization demonstrates the emotional irrationality that has complicated resolution of this incident. Our research team was investigating quantum consciousness phenomena using voluntary subjects under established scientific protocols." Ambassador Chen's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several representatives shift uncomfortably. "Counselor Prime, the subjects were 8 and 12 years old. Children cannot consent to alien medical experimentation, especially when that experimentation involves the deliberate induction of psychological trauma to enhance research results. The exchange revealed the fundamental gulf that had opened between human and Zilithian understanding of the incident. To the Zilithians, they had conducted valuable research using subjects whose consent was irrelevant due to their limited cognitive development. To humanity, they had committed one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Furthermore, Ambassador Chen continued, our analysis of the quantum resonance patterns recorded during the children's captivity reveals that the Zilithians discovered that psychological distress amplified the effects they were studying. They then deliberately maintained conditions designed to keep the children frightened and confused in order to enhance their experimental results. The accusation sent shockwaves through the chamber as representatives began to understand the scope of what humanity was alleging. Several species had their own concepts of juvenile protection, and the idea that an advanced civilization would systematically torture children for research purposes challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic moral development. Korathan Ambassador Thek Vran, whose species had extensive military traditions, spoke with barely concealed disgust. If these allegations are accurate, the Zilithians have committed acts that violate the most basic principles of civilized behavior. The deliberate torture of juveniles for many species is beyond acceptable conduct. The support from the Korathans was significant, as their species had often served as military allies to various galactic powers. If they were siding with humanity on this issue, other military species might follow. Counselor Prime Vethalan attempted to regain control of the narrative. Ambassador Thek Vran, you are allowing emotional responses to cloud rational analysis. The temporary distress experienced by two individuals must be weighed against the potential benefits to all sentient life. The advances in consciousness studies resulting from our research could benefit every species in this chamber. The response revealed the depths of Zilithian misunderstanding about human psychology and, increasingly, the psychology of other galactic species. The assumption that rational analysis could justify any individual suffering for the greater good was being challenged by representatives who had their own concepts of moral behavior. Ambassador Chen seized the moment to drive home humanity's position. Counselor Prime, you have just demonstrated exactly why humanity can no longer trust Zilithian judgment regarding interaction with our civilians. You continue to characterize the torture of children as temporary distress justified by potential scientific advancement. This reveals a fundamental incompatibility between human values and Zilithian research methodologies. The statement was more than diplomatic protest. It was a declaration that humanity was reassessing its relationship with galactic civilization based on the discovery that advanced species could hold moral frameworks completely incompatible with human values. Therefore, Ambassador Chen continued, humanity is implementing immediate protective measures for our civilian populations throughout the galaxy. Effective immediately, all Zilithian research activities involving human subjects are terminated. All joint human-Zilithian projects are suspended pending comprehensive review, and all Zilithian access to human space is restricted to essential diplomatic functions only. The economic implications of humanity's declaration were staggering. Human-Zilithian collaboration formed the backbone of numerous industries, from quantum computing to consciousness research to interstellar navigation. The sudden termination of these relationships would create cascading effects throughout galactic commerce. But Ambassador Chen wasn't finished. Additionally, humanity is invoking Article 15 of the Galactic Protection Protocols, requesting that all member species implement similar restrictions on Zilithian access to their juvenile populations until comprehensive safeguards can be established. Article 15 was an obscure provision that allowed species to request collective protection measures when facing existential threats to their civilian populations. It had never been invoked in the Council's recorded history, but the legal framework existed specifically for situations where one species posed a systematic threat to another's survival. The debate that followed would last for 18 hours and reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. Species after species rose to address the fundamental question raised by the incident. What moral obligations did advanced civilizations have toward less developed species, and what happened when those moral frameworks proved incompatible? The vegan cooperative, known for their pacifist philosophy, surprised many by supporting humanity's position. The deliberate infliction of suffering on juveniles violates principles that transcend species boundaries, declared their representative. If advanced civilizations cannot be trusted to protect the vulnerable, then what is the value of advancement itself? The Altarian Republic, whose own expansion had been marked by careful attention to indigenous rights, added their support. The Zilithian assumption that their scientific objectives justified any means reveals a dangerous precedent. If we accept that species can exploit others for research purposes without consent, we undermine the foundations of galactic law itself. But not all species supported humanity's position. The Crystalline Collective, whose silicon-based consciousness operated on vastly different temporal scales, argued that short-term individual suffering was insignificant compared to the potential for species-wide advancement. Several other highly logical species echoed similar sentiments, creating a divide between empathy-based and logic-based moral frameworks. Admiral Morrison received updates on the Council debates while maintaining her blockade of the theoretical convergence in the Kepler 442 system. The Zilithian research vessel remained in orbit, its crew apparently waiting for diplomatic resolution of the crisis they had created. Admiral, her communications officer reported, "We're getting reports from human settlements throughout the galaxy. The economic pressure is having significant effects on Zilithian infrastructure, but they're also receiving support from several logic-based species who view the research as justified." Morrison studied the tactical displays showing her fleet positions around the alien vessel. 43 human ships now surrounded the theoretical convergence, creating an inescapable containment field that had drawn attention from across the galaxy. But more importantly, the standoff had become a symbol of humanity's determination to protect their civilians regardless of diplomatic consequences. "What's the status of the children?" she asked. Dr. Chen reports that Sarah and Jake are recovering physically, but the psychological trauma is significant. They're afraid to be separated from their parents and show signs of severe anxiety when exposed to unfamiliar technology, her medical officer replied. Morrison felt the cold fury that had been building in her chest since the crisis began. The Zilithians had stolen 2 children, tortured them for scientific data, and then attempted to justify their actions through appeals to rational analysis and the greater good. The violation was so complete, so fundamentally wrong, that compromise seemed impossible. "Admiral," her executive officer approached with a priority message pad, "we're receiving a transmission from the theoretical convergence. Commander Zek Stuhl is requesting permission to address the human fleet directly." Morrison considered the request for a moment before nodding. Perhaps it was time for the Zilithian commander to fully understand what he had done and what it meant for the future of galactic civilization. The transmission that followed would be broadcast throughout human space and become one of the most significant communications in interstellar history. "Admiral Morrison, this is Commander Zek Stuhl of the Zilithian research vessel Theoretical Convergence. I wish to address the misunderstandings that have complicated resolution of our current situation." Morrison's response was delivered in a voice that carried 27 years of military authority and the fury of an entire species whose children had been threatened. "Commander Zek Stuhl, you are surrounded by 43 human vessels because you kidnapped 8 and 12-year-old children from their parents, transported them to your ship against their will, and conducted experiments designed to cause them psychological trauma while you collected scientific data from their suffering. There are no misunderstandings here, only consequences. Admiral Morrison, you must understand that our research was conducted for the benefit of all galactic civilization. The advances in consciousness studies we achieved during our investigation could revolutionize understanding of sentient awareness itself. Surely the temporary distress of 2 individuals is acceptable when weighed against such potential benefits." The response that followed would be quoted in human military academies for generations as the moment when humanity formally rejected the moral framework that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. "Commander Zek Stuhl, You just revealed everything we need to know about your species and why humanity can never again trust Zilithian judgment regarding our civilians. You describe the torture of children as temporary distress justified by scientific advancement. You assume that your research objectives outweigh their rights to safety and protection. You fundamentally do not understand why every human in the galaxy is prepared to go to war over this incident. Morrison paused, allowing her words to propagate through communication networks to every human settlement in known space. Let me explain something that your species apparently failed to learn in all your centuries of philosophical development. Children are not research materials. Their suffering cannot be justified by potential scientific advancement. Their consent cannot be assumed based on your assessment of their cognitive limitations, and any species that believes otherwise has revealed itself to be fundamentally incompatible with human civilization. The transmission reached monitoring stations throughout the sector within minutes and propagated across galactic communication networks within hours. Morrison's words became a rallying cry for human populations throughout known space and a warning to alien species. But the Admiral wasn't finished. Commander Zach Thule, your vessel will remain in this system until comprehensive guarantees are established that no Zilithian research program will ever again threaten human civilians. Your crew will cooperate with human investigators documenting your research methodologies so that similar incidents can be prevented, and your government will formally acknowledge that the abduction and torture of human children constitutes a crime against our entire species. The ultimatum was broadcast to every ship in the human fleet and relayed to human authorities throughout the galaxy. Morrison was not just addressing the Zilithian commander. She was announcing humanity's new policy towards species whose moral frameworks proved incompatible with human values. The Galactic Council debates continued for 3 more days before reaching a resolution that satisfied no one but prevented immediate war. The Zilithians agreed to terminate their research programs involving human subjects and submit to oversight by a joint commission including human representatives. Humanity agreed to resume limited trade relationships but maintained restrictions on Zilithian access to civilian populations. But the real resolution came in the weeks and months that followed, as humanity implemented systematic changes to their expansion and integration policies. Never again would humans assume that advanced alien civilizations shared their moral frameworks. Never again would they integrate into alien societies without maintaining independent defensive capabilities. And never again would they trust that galactic law could protect their most vulnerable citizens. Elena Chen stood in the New Geneva Colony's rebuilt research center 6 months after the incident, watching Sarah and Jake play with other children in the secure area that had been constructed around the settlement. The sight of her children laughing and running with their friends was precious beyond measure, but she could still see shadows in their eyes when they encountered unfamiliar technology or unexpected sounds. The Zilithian crystals that had originally drawn the children's attention had been relocated to a secure research facility where human scientists were studying their quantum properties without risking civilian exposure. The work was proceeding slowly, carefully, with comprehensive ethical oversight that would prevent the kind of exploitation her children had endured. Chen, Chief Webb approached with a datapad. We're receiving the latest reports from human settlements throughout the galaxy. The new protection protocols are being implemented successfully. Human civilian populations are being consolidated into secure sectors with independent defensive capabilities. Elena nodded, understanding that the changes represented both victory and loss. Humanity had successfully prevented future incidents like the one that traumatized her children, but the cost had been the end of the age of innocent cooperation with alien civilizations. "Marcus," she said quietly, "sometimes I wonder if we overreacted." The Zilithians were trying to advance scientific knowledge that could benefit everyone. Webb's response carried the weight of someone who had witnessed the children's terror and recovery. "Elena, they tortured your kids to collect research data. There's no amount of scientific advancement that justifies that. And the fact that they still don't understand why we're angry proves we made the right choice." The conversation was interrupted by shouts of delight from the play area as Sarah and Jake called for their mother to see something they had discovered. Elena smiled as she watched her children exploring their world with curiosity and wonder, protected by protocols that ensured they would never again be vulnerable to alien exploitation. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth about humanity during the crisis. They were a species capable of extraordinary cooperation and peaceful integration with alien civilizations, but they possessed limits that could not be crossed without triggering responses that would reshape interstellar politics itself. In the years that followed, the human Zilithian incident would be studied as a turning point in galactic history, the moment when one species' protection of their young challenged the moral assumptions of an entire civilization. The Zilithians, forced to confront the consequences of their actions, eventually developed new research methodologies that respected individual consent and psychological well-being. Other species reassessed their own policies regarding interaction with human civilian populations. But most importantly, human children throughout the galaxy could sleep safely, knowing that their species had shown the universe exactly what happened to those who threatened their young. The lesson would not be forgotten, and never again would any alien civilization make the mistake of assuming that human children were acceptable research subjects. The age of naive trust in galactic civilization was over. In its place, humanity had built something far more valuable: the absolute guarantee that their children would be protected regardless of the cost in diplomatic relationships or galactic standing. The children of New Geneva had been rescued, their tormentors held accountable, and their safety secured for generations to come. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered to a species whose greatest strength lay in their unwavering commitment to protecting their most precious treasure, their young.